Alright guys, so this video is going to help us walk through our writing to make it more concise. So making our writing more concise, already we could make this more concise by just saying we're going to be writing concisely. Our goal is we want to get rid of all the extra fluff. This is an issue I'm seeing in a lot of our writing, so anytime that I give you feedback that says make more concise or a tad too wordy, come back to this video and see if it can help. One of the first things you always want to do, even before you turn something into your teacher or professor, is read your writing out loud. By reading your writing out loud, you'll find more mistakes than if you read it silently. So a lot of times when we read something in our heads, we mentally connect the dots because we know how it's supposed to sound, but it's not how it sounds to your reader at all. So by reading it out loud, you're more likely to catch silly mistakes that you make. So one of the ways that you can do this is print it off and read it. Sometimes just changing it from a screen to paper helps. Follow along with your finger or block out certain sections to help you stay focused. Read slowly. A lot of times this will help us as well because we just go too quickly and we don't catch things. Consider reading your paper out loud one sentence at a time, starting from the end. This one is really beneficial. If you read starting down here, one sentence at a time, and then work your way back, your brain doesn't fill in any extra spots, and you catch a whole lot more mistakes. And then this one is similar to covering it up with your finger, but cover everything but the sentence you're working on. Again, so you don't fill in the blanks. Now you can always ask a friend to read it. A lot of you, by submitting it for feedback for me, you're asking somebody else to check it out, but asking somebody you trust as a friend or a parent to read it is also very beneficial. So once we've read through it out loud and we have found some silly mistakes, these are some key things to keep an eye out for. So the word that, oh my gosh, this is my biggest pet peeve. 9 times out of 10, guys, you can simply remove this word. So this sentence says, he could tell that she was hungry. Just take it out. He could tell she was hungry. You don't need it. It's too wordy. So whenever you're proofreading, look for the word that. 9 times out of 10, you can take it out. The phrase in order to should just be the word to. He wrote the he wrote that document in order to appeal to the masses. He wrote that document to appeal to the masses. You don't need it at all. Considered to be should generally just be considered. It was considered to be necessary. It was considered necessary. Very critical should just be critical. She was in a very critical condition. She was in critical condition. And the word very, guys, is a dinky word. It's weak diction. We don't want to use that. If you ever use and/or, you want to pick one. Because when you use both, you have an indecisive tone, which we don't want. Think back to our writing rubric. We want a formal and objective tone, not indecisive. Another thing to look for is if you're being redundant. And a lot of times you guys don't realize when you're being redundant. So some examples are, she hoped they would notice her accomplishments and achievements. Those are the same things. You don't need to say both. These changes are urgent and critical. Again, those mean the same thing. She wept tears of regret and remorse. Same thing. It was a beautiful, stunning vision, one of loveliness, charm, and allure. All of this is saying the exact same thing. And then if you ever use and so on and so forth, too wordy. You could just try and the like. So check for any of these in your writing and see if you have ever added too much where you could have just had a few words. Another big issue I'm seeing is passive voice. Now, we saw a lot of passive voice examples on the previous slide, but here I'm going to point them out to you. We want to, almost every single time we write, use active voice. Now, are there times where passive voice is better? Yes. Does that help with your Romeo and Juliet essay? No, we want this one, all right? So when a sentence is written, it can either be an active or passive voice. Active voice is used when the subject of the sentence performs the action stated by the verb. For example, Tom changed the flat tire. Whereas passive voice is used when the subject is acted upon by the verb. The tire was changed by Tom. These two sentences say the exact same thing. One is active, one is passive. You'll notice the active sentence is way less wordy than the passive sentence. Okay? So sometimes a sentence is in passive voice doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong or wordy. Right? This sentence right here is not technically wrong, but it is too wordy. So we would want to just reorganize the sentence. So whenever somebody gives you advice like me that says it's too wordy, or you need to be more concise, it's not necessarily changing what you've written, it's changing the order of the sentence. So check out for any of these keywords, because if you're using any of these, you are probably in passive voice. A, are, be, being, by, has been, have been, is, was, were, will be. Don't use be verbs. Not beavers, be verbs. Be, being, by, has been, have been, will be, okay? All of those are very clear passive voice. So now we're going to look at, okay, well, how do we fix it? I have found a sentence that is passive. I don't know how to fix it. So you need to recognize what the subject of the sentence is, and then rewrite it so that the subject is performing the action. So here's our example. Extensive training on the new safety procedures was required to be attended by the maintenance staff. Okay, very wordy. There's way too much going on. Is this sentence technically correct? Yes. Is it the best? No. We are advanced honor students. We can't keep writing things like this. So we can reorganize the sentence because the passive keyword is was, as well as to be. Okay? In order to change the sentence from passive to active, step 1, identify the subject of the sentence. Who's doing an action? The training is not doing an action, so it can't be the subject. The only person or thing doing an action here is the maintenance staff. They are attending the training. So the maintenance staff is the subject of the sentence, but look where it is. It's at the very end. That is so confusing for your readers, guys. It's almost like if you're in a conversation and somebody talks for a really long time and then at the very end of it, they say, oh, I was talking about this. It doesn't make sense. You just have to backtrack. So once we have identified our subject, step 2 is to rewrite the sentence so that the subject is performing the action. So we're going to go from this to this. The maintenance staff had to attend extensive training on the new safety procedures. We moved the subject to the beginning and then talked about what action it performed instead of having it at the end. All right, so let's look at some student examples and see how can we take something that's technically correct, but maybe just a little too wordy, and make it more concise. So here's a thesis statement that was submitted for the Romeo and Juliet essay. The cultural norms of the 1600s shaped the nature of Romeo and Juliet by setting societal standards which emphasized and belittled certain ideas, so the characters adhered to these standards which led to their deaths. Okay, so this is a great concept, great thesis. We've got all the parts, but it is too wordy. So what I'm going to do is walk you through my thought process on this thesis and see if that helps you figure out how to reword your writing. Now, like I said before, this is not technically incorrect, and I'm not going to ask the student to completely come up with a new idea. I'm just going to ask the student, where are some words we could take out? And where are some things that we could rearrange so that we're not so wordy? So the first part, I'm just going to walk you through my thought process. Let's see, the cultural norms of the 1600s shaped the nature of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, so to me, that's the first little part of our thesis here. Well, how did those cultural norms shape the nature? Well, by setting societal standards which emphasized and belittled certain ideas. Okay, so the characters adhered to these standards, which led to their deaths. All right, so I'm going through this and I'm seeing we definitely need this part because that's introducing us to what this essay is going to be about. We definitely need this final part because that's our so what factor. And I'm going to say this part because that's explaining. That's our because, that's explaining. So we do have this whole little extra section right here in blue. And I don't know if we need, and it's a little redundant of, you know, when the characters are shaped, they're adhering to the standards. So we could rewrite it to look like this. The cultural norms of the 1600s shaped the nature of the characters in Romeo and Juliet by setting societal standards which emphasized and belittled certain ideas, leading to the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. Still very long, but let's go through and see the same parts that we have. So the cultural norms of the 1600s shaped the nature of the characters in Romeo and Juliet. So here all we did was we took this extra part right here and we moved it up here where it was already talking about them being shaped, and so we added it right there. So we took out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words, just popped it up at the top with one word. Let's see, get my green. By setting societal standards which emphasized and belittled certain ideas, left that the same. And just for wording purposes, we couldn't leave this purple section the exact same, so we had to adjust it to say, leading to the deaths of Romeo and Juliet. So for that fix, we just found this one part that was just a little too wordy, and we could say all of that in one word. We just moved it around. Here's an even more concise way to write this. So this can now become this. The cultural norms of the 1600s shaped the characters in Romeo and Juliet by setting societal standards leading to their deaths. Ooh. Okay, so, you know, over here we had the specific characters, and here we said there because we know we're talking about the characters in Romeo and Juliet. We also took out this extra part of certain ideas because that's not very specific, and over here we have the societal standards which lends itself to certain ideas. All right, so we took this very long wordy thesis, we made it more concise, and then we made it even more concise. All three of these are technically correct, but one of these is going to be, whoops, one of these is the better. This is best. All right, let's look at another example. This is not a thesis statement, but just a section of somebody's word vomit essay that they've submitted to me on Teams. If parents are too strict with what they teach their children might become more rebellious than if they were laid back. Okay. I'm going to walk you through my thought process. We've got some redundancy. So we say children and children almost back to back. And that, you know, we don't need to say that twice. May become, that's indecisive. That's that indecisive passive voice. That makes it look like you don't know what you're talking about. You don't want passive. Same thing with if. Let's see how we could reword this. If parents teach too strictly, their children become more rebellious. Okay, so what we did here was if parents are too strict with what they teach, we took all of that and rewrote it to say, teach too strictly. This is passive voice. This is active. Do you see how many fewer words we used and we're saying the exact same thing? Their children may become, nope, they just become more rebellious. And we took out this whole part, than if they were laid back. Because that's understood in this part. Now here's another way we could, because technically we don't want this if over here. Parents who teach too strictly end up with more rebellious children than their laid-back counterparts. So here we took out any passive voice. They teach too strictly, so we stole that from here. And we took out if. Parents who do this end up with more rebellious children than their laid-back counterparts. So here we kept the laid-back, and by counterparts we're saying than if they were more laid-back, so we're already talking about any other parent who is more laid-back. All right, and one more example. In William Shakespeare's time, there were so many gender expectations. Everyone assumed that if someone were a certain gender, they had a certain job. Okay, so here's my thought process. In William Shakespeare's time, there were so many, we don't need that, gender expectations. Everyone assumed that if someone were a certain gender, they had a certain job. So we have some redundancy here. And really, we could connect these two thoughts. Could add a colon. So we could change all of this to say, in William Shakespeare's time, there were various gender expectations. So instead of saying so many, we've changed it to various. Okay, better diction. Everyone assumed certain genders had specific jobs. So here, instead of saying certain twice, we changed it so that we're not being redundant. Here's another way using that colon. In William Shakespeare's time, gender expectations were extensive. So instead of saying so many or various, we changed it to extensive. We used a colon because we are directly expanding upon this first thought. And then say everyone assumed jobs based on gender. All right, so to recap what we've talked about today, always read your writing out loud or have someone else read it. By doing this, you're going to find a lot more silly mistakes than if you just read your writing in your head and quickly. When you're checking your writing, look for any redundant words and phrases. Words that are used exactly the same over and over and over again, or words or phrases that mean the same thing. Also, look for words or phrases that can simply be removed. Where are there words that you just don't need? Take them out. And then check for passive voice and change it to active voice. So that's where you're looking for any of those be verbs, as well as making sure that your subject is in the proper place. And then please remember, when I give you feedback and I say that something is too wordy, that doesn't mean I want you to erase it. It just means you need to reword it so it flows well. What you've got is good, but we just need to fix it. I hope this video helps. If not, please let me know. But try some of these strategies and see if that doesn't help you create more concise writing.